Welcome aboard the RSS commentary on Monday, June 28th, 2021. I'm your host, the Captain, and today's top story, UN Human Rights Chief backs critical race theory and reparations. She says the West is systemically racist and needs to be torn down. And 4 states have sent law enforcement officers to the U.S. southern border to mitigate the Biden-Harris immigration crisis. Now, our top story here from Breitbart, UN Rights Chief calls for end to systemic racism, seeks reparations, funding of Black Lives Matter. The UN Rights Chief on Monday called on the world to immediately dismantle systemic racism against people of African descent and, quote, make amends, end quote, to the oppressed, including reparation payments, while groups like Burn, Loot, Murder should receive, quote, funding, public recognition, and support, end quote, for all of the rioting, for all of the burning and looting and murdering, for the targeted assassinations of conservative journalists, for the terrorizing of the people of America with their nonstop race riots for years based on this critical theory trash from the Frankfurt School, which is an old school Marxist organization, mostly old white dudes. Michelle Bachelet claimed the dehumanization of people on racial grounds had fed a culture of tolerance for discrimination and violence, declaring the time has come to end the practice. So, dehumanization. So, by that, I mean, does she mean the dehumanization of white people as predators, as the oppressors who are stricken with the disease called whiteness, which, if you're unfamiliar with this critical race theory trash, whiteness is the story that white people and white allies tell themselves to justify their dominant role as the oppressor of the victim class, which in critical race theory is based on racial grounds, but there's a whole family of these critical theory trash, pseudo-academic, scholarly, or pseudo-scholarly academic literature. So they also have critical gender studies, and critical gender studies says that it's the patriarchy that has been oppressing women and preventing, they put a glass ceiling over top of them, preventing them from rising up to the top, because if all of the women did that and they all have put off having kids until their 30s, then we would have a mass population die off. And, well, the wealthy elites would like that to happen. I don't particularly want that to happen to my family. And I don't particularly want the American people to be dying off rapidly while the rest of the world is exploding in population, because, well, that would just be stupid. But the people who believe this stuff are pretty stupid. Former Chilean socialist president Bachelet's recommendations include reparations for historical racism as well as state funding for groups like Burn, Loot, Murder, and as a starting point to tackle an issue she said knows no bounds or borders. So wait a minute. So let's remove the white people from history and what would have happened. Okay, so who invented slavery? Where did slavery come from? Did white people invent it when they invented modern technology and then they went enslaved Africa? No, of course, that's not the way history happened outside of the critical race theory. The reality is that Africans invented slavery. So let's take the white people out of history. And what do we get? You get Africans enslaving other Africans. So what were most slaves used for? Manufacturing stuff in the cities for their colonialization. Right. No, it's absolutely not true. Slaves were used for farm labor. So let's say these people weren't enslaved, and then you didn't have the cities that the white people constructed. What would these people be doing all day from dusk till dawn? Well, they'd be on a farm. They wouldn't have adequate weapons to defend themselves. And then another person would have, groups of bandits, thugs, Vikings, they would have came and they would have murdered everybody at the farm and taken people as slaves. So this is why this critical race theory, this is one of many reasons why this critical race theory is trash, because it's okay, the same people that they're saying in this critical gender theory, the same people who are the oppressed people in the roles, in the critical race theory, these white women who got oppressed by the patriarchy of white men, these white women were white supremacists who owned slaves, and they were extremely racist, and they were very brutal, and they were very dumb. So in critical theory, the oppressed person is both simultaneously the oppressed and the oppressor, which is one of the problems with critical theory. But the main problem of the fact that they're criticizing, that's neither here nor there. That's whatever. What they're doing and what's wrong about this is that it brings up racial resentment and hatred by stereotyping the white people who invented modern technology as all that is wrong with the world. And the people who are the victims are the white feminists and the people who live in the big cities in the United States that are experiencing this systemic racism, and the migrants in Europe who flooded into Europe and are causing rapid demographic changes, jacking up the rent prices in the cities. So when they say systemic racism, what they're saying is that all the white people are racist and the system that they built is holding down the non-whites because they have bad intentions. They have this disease called whiteness that is the story that they tell themselves to justify their dominance role as the oppressor of the victims. And it brings up racial resentment because this stuff, it doesn't happen everywhere. There's cities where there's a bunch of poor blacks and poor Latinos. But let's look at the cities in Africa. You're saying, oh, these people, they're discriminated against. They got it so bad. You're like, really? You go over to these people's houses, and they have big screen TVs. They got the latest console system. They got high-speed internet. They got cable TV. They got a whole bunch of junk food. They're sitting on a nice couch. Their bedroom area is pimped out because they like to have sex. And they have a nice car because they're living in a culture that glamorizes having nice cars. So they invest money in this stuff, and they're wearing really nice clothes. So they're saying that they're oppressed while they're like talking and posting on the internet with smartphones made with Chinese slave labor. You never hear a peep from these people about the Chinese slaves. All you hear is white people enslaved Africa. They made these people's lives worse. But the reality is the vast majority of people in Africa are at the bottom of the social hierarchy, living in poverty. The vast majority of African Americans, I'm not a European American. My family's from Philadelphia. I don't know where in Europe they're from. All I could tell you is that my uncle used to live in Manayunk, and my grandma lived in Wayne. My great-grandpa was ran the Lancet Inquirer newspaper there. That's all I know. Beyond that, I don't know. I don't know really anything about my family. Like, we're from the East Coast, bro. I'm not a European American, but these people, it's like they can't just say they're a Black American. They have to put the African first. They can't say, I'm an American with African ancestry. They have to specifically say, no, man, my allegiance is to Africa first and America second, to my race first. Well, actually, that's kind of just a construct of English, actually, really. So the thing is like these people up in the big cities, they get really bad grades. They have big, out of control crime problems. They only 25% of Black people grow up in matrimony where their parents are married. And it used to be a long time ago, 80% of Black people grew up in matrimony. And that was considered very low because the white people had 95% of people growing up in matrimony. And it was widely considered at that time that having two married parents was one of the most important things to being affluent, to having power. And so the people who have a lower rate of two-parent households have a much higher rate of poverty, of drug abuse. But the Democrats are trying to say it's not the Democrats running the big cities, because most Democrats live in big cities, and whatever in Europe, most liberals live in big cities. It's just the thing about cities. People don't want to. People are in close contact with a lot of people from different parts of the world because in the big cities, there's more of a mix of race, an even mix of races in the big cities. But then so the Democrats, this causes the Democrats to want to pack more immigrants in there. And then the liberals in Europe too, because they want access to the immigrants' children's votes. So the immigrants might not be able to vote here, but then their children will be able to vote there. So the more immigrants they fit into these big cities, the more state or aid that they get from the federal government. And so it's like they have all these perverse incentives to pack the big cities full of immigrants, and then they give them socialism to get them to vote for them, and then they get them hooked on handouts. The public education system's a failure because of their teachers unions and all the regulations that they have that prevent the teachers from providing the students with a quality product. They have it's like they're incentivizing being a single parent because you got two households to sell goods to. You can sell twice as many of these products. You have twice as many homes now to fit extra children to. So it's like, and for the politicians, what do they get out of it? They get when they promise all these handouts to people, when they say the system is systemically racist, we're going to rob Peter to pay Paul so that we can get Mary, the white feminist, and Paul to vote for them. Essentially, what they're doing is the minorities in these big cities are such a large voting bloc that they have to pander to them. So they have this culture of pandering to these people in the big city who did very poorly in school. Like the average grade point average of a Asian in the United States was like 3.26. The white people had a 3.03 GPA. The Latinos had a 2.76. And then the Black Americans had 2.4 or something. I can't remember exactly what it was off the top of my head, but the Asians, they also too used to be slaves. I mean, you see, the problem is what they've defined racism as is anti-black racism based on the transatlantic slave trade. That what they're saying is there wasn't any white slaves, that it was just the white people that enslaved the Africans, but it's not true. When in the beginning of America, the times of America, almost all the slaves, with the exception of some American Indian slaves, were white. They used to send prisoners to the colonies to work as slaves. The locals loved to work the prisoners to death as punishment for their crimes. Then they would kidnap homeless people off the streets and take any scragglers that they could. And in those days, these people, they would oftentimes die from really bad diseases in the big cities. And so if we didn't have the farms, so they justified slavery because they made the people work on farms. And this allowed people to build modern society. And so whereas they're trying to shame people for doing something that was like absolutely common all throughout history that Africans are doing, it's like they're trying to divert attention away from the failed public schools and from the failed Democrat policies, because most black people, most Latinos live in big cities in the United States. Immigrants tend to congregate in big cities. And in most of the big cities, there's not the same percentage of white people as there is averaged out throughout the entire country. So when we keep packing these immigrants in, what it does is it keeps jacking up the price of the rent in the big city. Like the Latinos are really bad about bringing in narcotics through the cartels. They're getting human trafficked in through these cartels, and they're using these big cities to distribute trillions of dollars worth of narcotics just right in front of your eyes. The Democrats know that the illegal immigrants are bringing in boat tons of fentanyl, meth, heroin. All they care about, though, is power. All they want is access to the Latinos' children's so that they'll vote blue no matter who, which means that they'll always vote for Democrats because the Democrats are trying to make it a sanctuary nation to prevent the conservatives, who mostly live in small to medium-sized cities and in rural areas, trying to prevent them from enforcing our immigration laws in order to boost the population so that they can get government handouts, get more U.S. House of Representatives seats, and also to boost their population relative to the rural areas so that they could drown out the votes of the people in the rural area. And that's why they're pushing this stuff. That's why they've institutionalized this, because this critical race theory garbage comes from like the law school, like Harvard Law School, Cornell Law School, all the Ivy Leagues. Like, they got together and did some conference. It used to be critical legal studies, which was like a Marxist branch from the ideology branch from the Frankfurt School, a Marxist group composed of older white men back in the 30s. And so what they're trying to do, is these people are trying to come up in this social hierarchy of critical race theory. So in critical legal studies, what they did was they had this like marking, the header that they used. And then whenever you'd see a critical legal studies paper, it had the same header. And so that's how you would identify this group of Marxists. One Harvard law professor described them as a group of law school activists who were like it's like a body of literature and then an organization of people that are organized around this literature. And, you got to do theses to get your master's or doctorate in the universities. So they do these papers and they develop they just churn out these junk papers based on, they start giving names to the cray or the craziness. And then it allows them to speak about the cray directly. And then it allows them to manipulate the cray in these really, really sophisticated scholarly ways to make a entirely insane ideology based on a false history. So what they're saying is that the entire system is systemically racist because there's like crime problems in the big city from the poverty. Okay, so they keep flooding the big cities with immigrants, right? And then they're like, well, there's massive income inequality between all of these immigrants that you just brought in. We can't just bring in the immigrants to use them for cheap labor. No, we got to buy stuff made by slave labor from China or some other communist country like Vietnam. And we have to address the poverty instead of addressing the slavery that's going on in China and the corporations that are making money hand over fist, utilizing the corrupt fascist government of China, which claims to be communist, but they have rampant capitalism everywhere and like private property is normalized. That's the big thing about communism. There's no private property. There's no capitalism. You don't export capitalist workers for slave labor, dude. That's totally not at all allowed under communism. That's called stealing the fruit of the proletariat, which means the workers. But they're insanely corrupt. Democrats are funded by people who make money hand over fist in China. So they've seized on this critical race theory because it's a simple to describe version of history. It's a false version of history. It says that white people enslave Africans, that our system has systemic racism baked into the cake, which is complete BS because we got the Civil Rights Act here in the United States. Actually, our culture, our tradition is actually based around overcoming that. And that's what they're trying to say too. They're like, no, they're saying that our identity is based around overcoming racism. But what they're doing is they're stabbing us in the back. They're stoking this racial resentment and hatred from this false version of history where they're saying it's like all the white people's fault. Yeah, like it's the white people made the black people in the hood smoke crack and bang heroin and listen to hip hop music. They literally forced black people to buy hip hop albums. They did. I personally force black people to smoke marijuana. That see, it's systemic racism, right? See? The reality is pop culture has made it so that it's uncool to be a nerd. I'm a software and computer engineer. I know all about how the women don't know what I'm talking about and how this is kind of boring. You know, they want to date the software and computer engineer so that they can get access to his money. But then most of them are like saying this dude's boring and then leaving with the alpha male guy. So with the critical race theory, what they're saying with this whiteness stuff is that we all have this like secret code. It's like a handshake, you know, like we go up to each other and we're like, what's up? Whiteness, you know, and then it's like this secret code that we use to justify our role as dominant and the oppressor of the victim class, which is the non-whites. And then there's also the white allies. And the white allies are people who utilize this whiteness disease. They also too have the disease known as whiteness. And they internalize this oppressor and dominance role because they're like Uncle Toms. Like, because it's like all the like quote unquote people of color, they all like think and act the same. They're like this monolith. Like whenever you get like a bunch of people of color in the same room, like they're all just going to like hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And they're all going to talk about the evils of critical race theory and how white people are bad. And then nobody's going to rob anybody. Nobody's going to start a fight. Nobody is going to start freaking on somebody else's girlfriend and then get shot. And in the real world, now we got the Muslims over in Europe going around just like stabbing people left and right. We've got the Palestinians putting children in where they know the Israelis are going to bomb. They send off these. They got a bunch of funding from Joe Biden. So they take the funding and then they buy a bunch of weapons. They shoot a bunch of missiles into Israel because they know they're going to get an overwhelming military response. So then they take children and then they pack the children into the areas where they know they're going to get bombed because they know it's really bad press. And then everybody over here falls for it because the media promotes this stuff. Because to them, they think the Israelis are these bad people that they've been occupying Gaza and the West Bank, and that they stole the land from the Muslims, and that the Israelis, the illegal immigrants, are stealing the Palestinians' land, that are invaders coming to prevent them from practicing Sharia law over there. It's like people are just completely clueless to this propaganda. Like to them, the whole time they're saying that white people are bad because they're trying to kick out the illegal immigrants and build a race wall on the southern border. I mean, if you could just take a moment to just sit in awe of how hypocritical that is, where they're on one side, they're condemning Israeli Jewish settlers because of their skin color and their religion. They illegally immigrated into Palestine, where over 1/3 of the population is an illegal immigrant in Palestine. And then almost half of the population isn't even from Palestine. So when they say that the Jews stole the land from the Palestinians, they totally omit the fact that half the people there don't have any legal right to be there. And then in Jordan, the country right next door, then you got 39% of the population is from Palestine. You're like, okay, Did you steal? Did Palestine steal the land from Jordan? Really? No, you see, they have a double standard. And why? Because of cognitive dissonance. It's cognitive dissonance in play. If you're unfamiliar with this, I studied psychology in college, so I know all about cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is best described as the cognitive dissonance triangle, where let's say you have Peter, Paul, and Mary, and you're trying to run an election, okay? So Paul is a black guy, right? Peter is a white guy. Peter is a Republican, and Peter oppressed Paul, and Paul is broke because he didn't do very good in school, okay? Now, Mary is a white feminist. White feminists are a form of feminism where they put white women's issues above everyone else's. So there's an election and a politician is trying to get them to vote for them. So what they do is they rob Peter to pay Paul because Mary's a white feminist. Because of critical gender theory, she thinks that Peter oppressed Paul and therefore he is justified to have been robbed. This is called a cognitive dissonance triangle. Mary, since she's a white feminist, she holds contentious views. So on one hand, she says the patriarchy is bad. And then on the other hand, she says racism is bad because the patriarchy is bad. Even though the people who were the quote unquote oppressed people back in the day when there was a patriarchy were like white women who were known as white supremacists. So they're simultaneously the oppressors and the oppressed in this story. So Mary is against stealing because she's a feminist and she's like morally superior to everyone else. But she votes for the snake politician who robbed Peter to pay Paul because of cognitive dissonance. She hates Peter so much that she overlooked the fact that the snake politician robbed Peter to give money to Paul because she thought it was unfair. So this is the same thing that's going on with the Muslims. The Muslims are associated with non-white, and non-white is associated with the victim class, and white is associated with the oppressor class or the victimizer class. And so Mary, the white feminist, she hates misogyny. She lividly hates Peter because he's a Republican. She says he's a misogynist. But let's say Peter criticized Islam because most people don't know this, but the Islamic prophet Muhammad had a child bride named Aisha, Aeisha. She was 6 to 9 years old. 6 at the youngest, 9 at the oldest. The guy owned slaves, including 3 black slaves. He killed Jews. He killed Christians. So, bringing up the facts, you haven't pissed him off yet, right? But if you say the Prophet Muhammad was a bad person and that the Islamic religion is garbage because it was started by a pedophile, Jew and Christian killing rapist, misogynist, now all of a sudden, now you have pissed off Mary the white feminist because she hates that the white male patriarchy dominated the non-whites and the women because they dominated her class, her identity group. So even though she lividly hates misogynists, She gets offended when you criticize Islam because that is called Islamophobia, and Islamophobia is a form of racism because Muslim means non-white. This is the problem with this critical race theory. The people who are pushing it are allied with China and Russia. In fact, Russia and China have been putting out critical race theory propaganda in Western media. And the reason why is because it's Marxist dialectical materialism. What this is, it's a concept in Marxism. And the reason why it's the bourgeois or the proletariat, which is the working class, smashing the bourgeoisie, which means the wealthy land and business owning class, which is traditionally white. So what they say in dialectical materialism is that there is an oppressor role, oppressor class, and there's an oppressed class. And the oppressor class has negated the oppressed class, which is the workers. And that in order to mitigate this, they need to negate the negation. Right? Because it's what they're doing is they're using formal logic to pervert a ideology. And they, it sounds on paper legit. You're like, all right, so I could follow some logical axioms and you could go, okay, negate the negation. And then now you have unity. The two sides that had to have a conflict because they were polar opposites, after they had the conflict, then they maintained unity. This is why they started killing so many people. This is why Stalin said that one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic, because it was like a just war. They thought if you can kill 1 million people in order to save 2 million people's lives, then that would make the murder of the 1 million people justified. It's the perversion of logic. And so what they're doing, the problem with this is that in order to actually keep this narrative going, you have to get people to fight each other. The entire point is to make people hate each other and to stoke resentment. And then whenever we start fighting with each other, what happens is that 1/3 of the world is Muslim and 1/3 of the world is quote unquote communist / fascist. So when we fight along this lines where the white people have become the enemy, then we become outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Because if our side isn't trying to stab us in the back, right off the bat, we're outnumbered 2 to 1 in this fight. But now you get half of our people to stab us in the back. Well, now you have gone up to 3 out of 5, right? Is that right? Over 3/5, and that 3/4, yeah. Then three. Hold on, 2/3. No, 5 out of 6. Yeah, we would be outnumbered, like 5 to 30 would be the. I think. I can't think of it. I haven't been doing too much math off the top of my head. But that's really bad numbers. If you're going to get in a fight, that means you lose. So what we have to put a stop to this critical race theory garbage, because it really is extremely anti-American. Here, let's read a little bit more into this article. Her report includes Yeah, I read that. So her report also identifies a long overdue need to confront the legacies of enslavement, the transatlantic slave trade that enslaved Africans, and colonialism, and to seek reparatory justice. So let me get this straight. So the transatlantic slave trade, was that like all the slaves? So what percentage of the transatlantic slave trade was enslaved by other Africans. Shouldn't it be the Africans who enslaved the Africans that should pay for this reparations? Not us, right? Because the people who benefited from it was everybody. Because when they forced the slaves to be on the farms, if they hadn't done that, then they would be on the farms. And then we would never have evolved the modern society that we did. It was because somebody else stayed on the farm that they were able to develop modern society. And then they didn't need farming equipment. And then at that point in time, then it was morally irreprehensible. But before you didn't have farming equipment, it was viewed as just another farm animal, like they had other farm animals out there. But in the beginning of America's history, it was almost exclusively white slaves. And then at the end, during the transatlantic slave trade, it was mostly black slaves. And then the Irish were being used for near slave labor in the big cities, along with all of the other immigrants. But the idea that Western society is built on the backs of slaves is not actually true. Western society is built on the backs of machines that freed slaves. And these machines were built by white people. That's the problem with this is the black people also too owned slaves. So also too, American Indians, they actually owned slaves. They owned black slaves. People think that these American Indians were these noble peace pipe smoking cartoons from the cartoons that they've seen, like Pocahontas, and like these drawings from cigarette and tobacco advertisements. They seriously have these bizarre preconceptions that these people are like perfect, that they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't invade other tribes, enslave people, rape women, sacrifice children and virgins. But the reality is that they did do all that stuff. They were just as bad as the white people. The only difference was that the Europeans had better farm animals. We had horses, cows, goats. And when we came over here, we gave the American Indians horses and we gave them guns. And what did they do? They bought black slaves. They went around to the other villages. They killed people with the guns. They made up to 95% of the American Indians died from smallpox, from all the people who were traveling around on these horses. And then they blame the white people. They say it's our fault because some person said some story about white people giving American Indians small blankets infested with smallpox, like they purposely meant to kill them. But the story ended up turning out to be completely bunk. The blankets were within an infirmary for some number of weeks. They were given to the American Indians, and the American Indians already were having smallpox outbreaks. Like, that's the problem with this critical race theory garbage, is it's based on a false version of history. They're saying colonialism was bad. It was like the worst thing that ever happened to the world. Then you look into it, and everywhere where the colonialists went, they exported English common law. English common law made it so there wasn't government corruption. And so now all the places where the colonialists went are the wealthy countries. And the places where they didn't go are authoritarian despots that are crime ridden, where the corruption there, the people, the locals were extremely corrupt, and they plundered the resources of the country themselves. We didn't have anything to do with it. They were the ones that plundered their own country because they were corrupt, because they didn't have English common law, because the colonialists didn't go there. And these countries have a lot of resources. It's not the amount of resources that was the reason why they're poor. It's because of the really, really bad politicians, the really corrupt people that believe all this spooky, weird stuff. So I'm going on too long about this article. We got some more articles. This is, if you want to read the rest of this one, you just search for that, or I'll put a link down below after the show. But stick around. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe so that you'll be notified whenever I'm going live. RSS Commentary is an indie news organization. You can find us online at rsscommentary.com. If you want to check out this show, you can type in /issue 130. And then you can find links to follow us on Twitter, but last I checked, I was still suspended, but I did send them a $1.6 billion lawsuit from my class, which is Indie News and Political Commentary, suing Big Tech. And if you want to check out the Big Tech lawsuit, you can do so at rsscommentary.com /issue 130, where you can read my 43-page lawsuit with the post entitled RSS Commentary initiates defamation lawsuit against corporate town Big Tech for election engineering. It's actually very interesting. If you want to make a donation, you can do so at rsscommentary.com /donate. Do so via PayPal. In our next article from Newsweek, these 4 states are sending law enforcement to the Mexico border amid surge in migration. Quote, America's border security crisis impacts every state and every American, end quote, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said in a statement. Florida became the latest state to join the effort, announcing Friday it would send 50 police officers to Texas. Governor Ron DeSantis said in a statement that, quote, America's border security crisis impacts every state and every American, end quote. Yeah, exactly. You see, one of the things that is highly overlooked about the Biden-Harris sanctuary nation crisis is that immigrants tend to congregate in large cities. And when they do so, the rent prices go through the roof. So where do most black people live? Most black people live in large cities, and these cities are run by Democrats. Oops. Sorry. Don't know why this is doing that. Oh, yeah, right. Sorry, this keyboard's silly. So here we go over this a lot on this chart, on this channel. This is a chart that I made. Explains the demographics of the Democrats. Here, this is from 2016. It's pretty similar. Oh, did the camera go down? It's been going for hours. All right. So this is a height map of the voters in the 2016 election. Haven't seen an update for the 2020 election, but I will update it as soon as possible. So these blue bars are people who voted for Hillary Clinton. And they're where most Democrats live, which are the big cities. And then in the red areas are where most Republicans live, and also in these pink areas. So you can see the pink means it's a higher color. So most of the black people live there. So when you have sanctuary nation laws that disrespect the laws of the great country of the United States of America, the country that brought freedom and democracy to the world, you create a state of lawlessness in these big blue bars here where most of the black people live. And these cartels are flooding these gigantic narcotics distribution centers here, these big blue bars, with meth, fentanyl, heroin, crack cocaine, more cocaine, and all kinds of other strange drugs that are killing friends and family members of yours. So it's not like it's just this innocent thing. It's not like, oh, well, I mean, it's fine, man. White people are just being systemically racist. They don't. No. You don't have a right to advocate for enforcing your immigration laws because of your skin color, because of the sins of your ancestors, because of all of the bad things that people with your skin color have done to people of color. That means that you're not allowed to oppose the Democrats packing the big cities with as many illegal immigrants as they can to boost the population of the big cities relative to the red areas here. You're not allowed to oppose that because it's your fault, because of your skin color, that the black people have such bad grades. Here's a chart of the GPAs of the various races. You can see the black people had a GPA average of 2.69 in 2009. Not good enough for engineering school. Cutoff is 3.0. The Latinos' GPAs were 2.89. White people's GPAs were 3.09. And the Asians topped the chart at 3.26. Good job. We're working on it. And so instead of saying, we want to work on this, like we don't want this because we don't want the crime in the big cities. Like I live in Oregon where there's like 1% black people here, but I've been victim of 2 home invasion robberies and another hostage situation with a serial killing gangbanger from Atlanta. And all 3 times there was a black person behind the gun. It's like statistically, the chance of that happening once is incredibly low. 3 times in a row, we call that one a black swan. Well, yes, stuff like that is pretty common in the hood. In fact, let me tell you from experience, this is very terrifying. They actually take your shoes off because they know that when you have your shoes off, it's easier to catch you. It's easier to kill you. So if we criticize these people, this means that this is what is called whiteness. This is the story that the white people tell that to justify their oppressor and dominance roles. And so if you say that the people in the hood are screwing up because they're doing too many drugs, they have a single mom epidemic, the public education system run by the Democrats and the teachers' unions is a complete failure, this is called whiteness. And you are exhibiting symptoms of a disease. And one of the symptoms of this disease called whiteness is called white rage. And this is when the dangerous white males exhibit rage from their white fragility. And they lash out at the oppressed people and blame them for being oppressed. This is... You'd think that I'm like being a comedian up here, right? You'd think I'm just like making this stuff up. I'm just like blowing this stuff out of proportion. No, I actually got this information from a PhD doctor in one of her papers. It's actually what they believe in. It's actually a body of research that is based upon a bunch of academics from big name schools like Harvard, Cornell, and other Ivy League schools. And they come up by publishing these research papers. And in these research papers, they look at stuff like this like income. This graph is the income of the various races. And it shows that the black people make the least amount of money and that they make on average over $30,000 per year, which isn't, if you compare this to the average income of the average African, it's sky high. This is actually really, really high average income for most of the world, actually. It's definitely not considered poverty level. Actually, it's not. And then above the black, and then on this chart, it says they were making average of about $35,000 a year. And then the Latinos were making on average about $40,000 a year. The white people were making on average about $57,000 per year, and the Asians were making on average about $68,000 per year. So, yes, there is obviously a noticeable, sizable difference in the amount of money that they make, but you also have to take into account that black people, when you control for income, spend on average 17% less on education than everyone else. And I don't know what it is for the Latinos, but it's also much less. So when you spend money on an investment and then you return, you do hard work and you get a return on the investment, it's not actually racism. It's not actually white supremacy. It's called an investment, hard work, and then getting a return on the investment. I would highly advise you internalize this quote unquote whiteness and become a white ally, because when you're not trying to stoke racial resentment and hatred and you're actually being an ally of the white people, you are actually a much more likable person. And if you're trying to get money from the white business owners, because almost half of the business owners in the United States are actually Republicans, it would be in your best financial interest to not be a hateful person who is associated with the criminals and vandalizers and looters in the hood and the rest of the riot on demand crew that the Burn, Loot, Murder Club has organized so that they can bring burners, looters, and murderers to your race riot and stoke that race riot turnkey, just like that. Push the button and it starts, right? Push key to start. That's what you do when you donate to the Burn, Loot, Murder Club, is you create a machine based around junk statistics that they're going to end up using. What is this? So, and they're going to use these statistics to amp up racial resentment while they flood in the big cities with all these Latinos. And then we have this huge income inequality. And then they say it's the white people's fault. They're not sharing equally. So we got to take the money from the white people and give it to all of the illegal immigrants that just illegally immigrated here, because the white people have been systemically racist against all of these Latino illegal immigrants. They just showed up, and when you show up in America, you show up and they give you money to illegally immigrate here, because that's how stupid the Democrats are. That's how much they want to boost the size of the red states relative to the red rural states so that they can override these big, bad conservative wolves. Make sure they're not huffing and puffing, blowing nobody's house down. You got to neuter them. You got to take away the white people's ability to have any sort of power or influence, because the patriarchal white males, the conservatives who have the competing political philosophy that garners so many views and so much popularity online, you have to stop them because this is a existential threat to the wealthy people in the big cities' ability to maintain control, right? Because this is the problem. The way that the scam works down there in California and these other big cities is that the price of rent is so damn high that most people can't afford to live there. So they'll move there and then they'll work at some job and then they'll realize that they can't get ahead. And then they'll go move to Texas or one of these other red states so that they don't have to have all of their money go to programs like they have in California where they pay on average $74,000 per homeless person per year because they got these corrupt crony groups. So most people haven't lived in these big blue bars long enough to know exactly how corrupt the Democrats are. They just move out right around the period of time where they are able to recognize the corruption in the system. And so the only people that are left are you have this massive amount of super rich people that their level of wealth is exponentially larger than the rest of the people. And then you have a bunch of slaves who are trapped in these big cities who can't afford to move out. And so they are then your source of cheap labor. And so they support these policies that the Democrats push because they want to divert blame away from the failed public education system because they want to be able to take your kids away from their parents and indoctrinate them into leftist groupthink so that they can control the masses. But the problem is that their ideology is self-defeating. Because the more of the Latinos that you pack into these big cities, the more conservatives you're bringing. Because the Latinos are not this like monolith group of people that are all like the same. They're actually like a very diverse group of people with a lot of different cultures. They don't think of them as Latinos down there. They think of them as Brazilians, Argentinians, Colombians, Mexicans, Hondurans, right? And so they actually care about their culture and their tradition and their way of life, and they don't live in cancel culture. So when you keep packing in all of these Latino immigrants, eventually it becomes a system where you're flooding in your political opponents in here and then jacking up the price of the rent. And then the people who was your voter base, they slowly exit the city as soon as they can. And then what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with people who are going to vote against you. So in order to keep this scam going, they use the public sector employee unions because it's one of the only groups of people around that is guaranteed to be there when you increase the price of rent. That is literally how the scam works. So they got the PTA parents down there in California all hopped up on their pharmaceuticals. They're popping Xannies and antidepressants and in some cases antipsychotic medications. And then they all go to the extremely boring, lame PTA meetings and they get out their smartphones and they go look up the whatever party platform they're supposed to vote blue no matter who. And then they sign all of the checks. And that is how the corruption is run there. They get a bunch of mindless zombie parents that are guaranteed to be there. See, this is the way that you have to understand the rich and the powerful is that they work on things that are guaranteed to be there. They're not working on some sort of like high risk thing that's probably going to fall apart. No, they might have some of that hedged, but they have a diversity of income. They have steady income. They have these things. They have corporations that they know they could put this much money in and they can get this much money out. So these people, they live a completely different life than everyone else. The other people are just working hourly per hour. And the way that the system is supposed to work is we're not supposed to have a minimum wage. We're supposed to bring in migrants and have them work for cheap. And then they go home, and the way this is justified is because in their country, they're poor. Here was a better gig. They got more money if they came here than if they stayed there. And we got something out of the deal. We got cheap labor. And then we have our competition is fascist Nazi China. China is supposedly communist, yet they have rampant capitalism. They have a top-down surveillance state, a totalitarian dictatorship that is not a bottom-up rule by proletariats. It is a top-down rule by elites who own multi-billion-dollar corporations overseas. And they have a lot of holdings that the Communist Party doesn't know about, because they know that the gig could be up and they might need to bounce to another country at any point in time. So they have their parachute already ready to go. And so our system is more competitive than this system because they utilize slave labor. They tell the poor people out in the countryside that they are communist so that they can not pay them any money. And then they just utilize them for slave labor. If you want to manufacture goods using their slave labor, then you need to bribe the Chinese quote unquote Communist Party boss so that you can exploit the fruits of the proletariat there. As long as you give him enough US dollars, then they will allow you to utilize their slaves for capitalist purposes. You just have to not criticize the Chinese quote unquote Communist Party. So our system is more competitive because over there, they just put the Uyghur Muslims in the concentration camps and they make them make your jeans with that Xinjiang cotton. In our system, they might be working for cheaper, but at least when they go home, there's a better exchange rate. And they made more money when they came over here, and they got to go home and they got to keep their culture, and we didn't annihilate their culture. Right? So our system where you say, oh, this is so unfair. Well, how are we going to repatriate these jobs that we lost to China? You know anybody that wants to make $1.50 an hour to solder stuff all day? Didn't think so. Don't know a single person raising their hand willing to work for $1.50 an hour, do you? Right? So our system, if we set it up so we could just axe this minimum wage like we should have done a long time ago, then we could repatriate these jobs that we lost to China, and we could help save these countries where these people are coming from by just guaranteeing that when they go home, that they're going to have the amount of money that they need to support their family when they go home, because that's all they care about. They don't care about what kind of hardships they have to put up with here while they're working. They care that they're able to send money home to their family. So if that's what they want, let's give it to them. That's a win-win, because immigration is supposed to be a win-win scenario. We're supposed to be like, okay, these people, they're not coming up here to take our land. They are coming up here to work. They're good, hard workers. They do the best job. And they don't hardly ask for anything. They don't complain. They're really nice. They are working almost all day. They're never causing problems. And so, as long as they're taken care of, they're happy. They don't. It's like they're working for they want to go somewhere and they want to work, and they want to be able to come home and then their poverty problem be solved. Right? That's kind of the way that these people work. If we're not doing it, nobody else will be able to provide that for them. So it's a win-win scenario. But if we don't do that, if instead we pack our big cities in with these illegal immigrants so that we could boost the size of the city relative to all these red rural areas, then it causes a depression in wages. It causes a spike in rent, which causes a massive spike in poverty. And then they blame systemic racism. See, this is the problem with Democrats. They cause problems. They blame other people for the problem so that they can propose their own solution to it. Then they stop causing the problem. They say they fixed it and they blamed you for it. That's why you have to stop voting for Democrats. You have to start doing more research. You can even, I'm not even saying read conservative news sources. All I'm saying is read a diversity of news sources and you'll probably come to the same conclusion that we came to. So anyways, that's it for this article. Hey, don't forget to smash that like button, hit that subscribe button down below so that you get notified when I go live. Here, let's move on to this next article. Well, it looks like you get a crash. All right. Let's talk about open air drug use in San Francisco. Here in this next article from Hacker News, San Francisco residents are fed up with city inaction on open air drug use. This is coming at us from the city-journal.org. It says, tucked deep in San Francisco's 6th district is Dodge Place, a residential street located in the notorious Tenderloin neighborhood. It's been overtaken by drug users who come to get high, descended into madness, then destroyed themselves and their surroundings as they take shits on the public sidewalks everywhere. Dodge is a dead end, literally and figuratively, a combat zone with all sides fighting for their lives. Citizens' cry for backups have gone virtually unanswered. Elected officials and government bodies, from the district supervisor Matt Haney to the Department of Public Health, have abandoned residents so completely that it's hard not to wonder if the neglect isn't debatable. Sorry, deliberate, not debatable. Though most of the 6th district, an area that includes City Hall, already rivals the world's worst slums for its inhumane conditions, Dodge Place is particularly intense contradiction of immiseration? What does this mean? You should look up words too. People oftentimes make up the definitions based on what they thought it was, and it's absolutely not what they thought it was. The act of immersating. And it means present
participle of immersate, which is to make miserable or impoverished. Immiserate. In effect, the dead-end street is at the end of a funnel which into flows customers from San Francisco's most rampant illegal drug trade. In fact, mere steps away from the street, residents recently held a rally against the scourge of fentanyl, the potent synthetic opiate responsible for the majority of the city's fatal overdoses. Comes from China, shipped in through the cartels. The cartels get it shipped to them directly through Chinese Communist Party members that are utilizing this fentanyl in order to do chemical warfare against the people of the United States. The more dope you do, the weaker our economy gets, the weaker our science, technology, engineering, and math ability is, and it causes massive economic damages, both direct financial damages from the loss of wages, the money spent on the narcotics, the money spent on the police and border agents, which is in the hundreds of billions of dollars per year. And this needs to be addressed as what it is, which is chemical warfare. I'm not the kind of person who's going to hate on any sort of rave drug or cocaine or alcohol or marijuana, any sort of non-hard drug. I think the war on drugs is complete BS, but fentanyl is public enemy number one. It is. Fentanyl kills almost 90,000 people, or is it more than 90,000 people per year? And since the start of the Biden-Harris sanctuary nation crisis on the southern border and in the big cities where they're utilizing big cities as massive narcotics distribution centers, this becomes a much larger problem than what it used to be due to this sheer amount of fentanyl that is being illegally trafficked in from cartels while they're using families to divert border agents away as they funnel in enough fentanyl to kill every person you've ever met. Organized by journalist Michael Schillenberger, the rally focused on Jackie, I don't like these stories. So what are they trying to say? Everybody's sick and tired of this stuff. I'm tired of smelling shit when I go downtown, having to look around to make sure I don't step on any needles. Like, I'm in Oregon and it's coming up here. You know, we're right next to California. There's a huge rent spike here. Housing went up at least double from when I was in college, and wages have not really gone up to reflect this. People are going homeless. People are committing suicide. People are blaming other people for this condition. And then the Democrats, they want to say it's not the lockdowns that is causing all of this poverty and the spike in the crime. It's white people. Because, you know, that capitalism is bad, that money is bad, we don't need money, like, I'm perfectly happy, I don't need to be rich, and then they'll be like, white people are bad because they have all the money. I don't need to be rich, but you are, so that means that you're bad because I'm not rich, right? You see, it's like, you could probably, we could yeet, so they say, the extra capital that was raked in by big business, maybe we could expel that at great velocity out of the economy. But we have to compete with China. So let's say that we yeet Jeff Bezos. Like, what's going to happen if we yeet Jeff Bezos? Not, Jack Ma controls everything? A foreigner? Oh, yeah, right. Because when the West is no longer in control, that means there's a power vacuum. So that's why they're doing all this stuff with these cartels, bringing in all these narcotics through the illegal immigrants, is because it's really just a corrupt power move by the Democrats, because most Democrats live in big cities where most black people live, and the black people are a large voting bloc there. Around the red areas in this graph, the red rural states, the black people are not a large voting bloc. It's only in these big cities where they are a large voting bloc. For the rest of the country, none of this has anything to do with them. They're just trying to live their life, but they can't because of the sanctuary nation laws, because we've got millions of people flooding in from the southern border in a very short period of time when we have a recession. And now we got all this fentanyl coming across the border and homeless encampments popping up. Like, looks like a music festival downtown. They got like hundreds of tents. What looks like hundreds of tents. It's like all of Washington Jefferson Park downtown is like a big, gigantic homeless encampment. You can't go to the park anymore because there's people banging dope from the cartels everywhere. Okay, so it was a little bit of a tangent. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go on to the next article here. This next article from Breitbart, Donald Trump tears into Rhino Attorney General Bill Barr for calling out election fraud claims bullshit. Donald Trump responded to a series of comments that Bill Barr made to ABC News reporter Jonathan Carr for his book about the former president's fight to challenge the results of the 2020 election. So, before we go into this, we got to address the elephant in the room. So, Sidney Powell obviously was up on some QAnon wingnut stuff. But the problem with the claims that they put forth, first off, another claim to dispel that all of the lawsuits were dismissed from court for election fraud. This is actually false. Dr. V.A. Shiva, the inventor of email, his lawsuit is actually still in the court. He has alleged that the Dominion Systems voting machines have a weighted vote system in their voting machines. These claims, to actually be able to address these claims, you need to actually inspect the voting machines, because these voting machines were made in China. They're vulnerable to supply chain hacks. There's lots of information about the Russians, Iranians, and Chinese doing hacking operations in the United States. You've also got the Time magazine article entitled "The Secret Bipartisan Campaign" or Shadow Campaign that quote unquote saved the election. This article was released on maybe it was. Never mind. Made an error somewhere. But so this article goes through the shadow campaign of people who were pushing mail-in voting, who were pushing for ballot harvesting. Mark Zuckerberg donated $500 million. That's with a B. There's false reports that he only donated $300 million. That was the first donation. Then there was another $150 million donation and another $15 million donation through him and Priscilla Chang combined. So he paid $500 million out of the kindness of his heart to Uncle Sam to pay for the election system that Uncle Sam pays for, because allegedly they can't come up with enough money to run the elections or something. So they have what they did, and what was so genius about their plan was they utilized the claim that there was a Russian disinformation campaign from the Russiagate Committee, which President Kamala Harris sat on. This committee, the Russiagate Committee, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, the one that constantly dripped out these little pieces of propaganda to damage and disinformation to damage Donald Trump. They said that Donald Trump won the 2016 election because of Russian hacking. He's not a legitimate president. They rioted, they burned, they looted, they murdered. And that this was justification then for them controlling all of the information points on social media and in the big media and in other corporate influences, because they needed to act as election officials and secure the election because of the disinformation campaign from the Russians. So what they're saying is there's some dudes in Russia putting out some memes about Trump. So we got to rig all this information to prevent Donald Trump from winning, because they're trying to fortify Donald Trump. So we must then fortify Biden and suppress Trump. Got to shut down any sort of claims that there is fraud with mail-in voting. They coordinated censorship of Republicans, of channels like RSS Commentary, as you can read in my lawsuit allegations at rscommentary.com/issue 130. You can read the lawsuit. So these people, they said there's no fraud in mail-in voting. There's no ballot harvesting is not fraud. And so Mark Zuckerberg, here's you can see on ballotpedia.org which states allow ballot harvesting. And so black means they don't allow it. So only Alabama is the only state that doesn't allow it. Everybody else is unspecified because it's not vote by mail. So all of the states that are in question that had all of these statistical anomalies, these quote unquote ballot dumps, which really were reports from areas with ballot harvesting. So they, hold on. Sorry. What was that? Where was that? So the ballot harvesting, the problem with the ballot harvesting is that big cities, most Democrats live in big cities. Like you can see on this graph of who voted for Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016, you could see that most Democrats live in these blue bars, and then most of the Republicans live in these big red areas where most of the country is red in the map. And then there's these huge spikes in the big cities, like in Los Angeles and in Chicago, Miami, and New York, and Seattle. So when you ballot harvest in these areas, you don't have to go very far to ballot harvest. So in the red areas, there's nowhere near as many people. So for when you put ballot harvesting boxes in big cities and you space them out evenly, this gives a dramatic advantage to the Democrats because of the density of the city, what it enables is people can target people on social media. Organizations of people can contact people directly and say, hey, have you filled out your ballot on social media? And then they can set up a time for them to go pick up the ballot. And because they're in a big city, their friend group is larger, their friends list, the people they're in contact with, this is much higher. So this allows them to do organized ballot harvesting campaign utilizing Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook. And Mark Zuckerberg paid $500 million to push these ballot drop boxes and the mail-in voting. And they spaced out these ballot harvesting boxes called Zucker boxes in Delaware County in Philadelphia, right outside of Philadelphia. Or no, that is Philadelphia, right? So there they were every four square miles. And then in the Republican areas, they were every 1,100 square miles. So you get obviously 4 square miles and 1,100 square miles is a gigantic difference in density, right? So this is why mail-in voting and ballot harvesting is voter fraud. Also, there's some other reasons because people have guns at their house. If mail-in voting turns your house into a polling place, turns everyone's house into a polling place. People have guns at their house, dude. There's like laws against voter intimidation. Like if you vote for Donald Trump in the house of a person who has Trump derangement syndrome, you're out. You're gone. They don't tolerate stuff like that because they're bigots. So this is problematic because people can take apps and they could scan ballots in these ballot drop boxes and they can tell what party you're in, what party you're registered for, and they can throw out Trump votes by just throwing out Republicans' votes. This is obviously voter fraud. That is 100% voter fraud in every meaning of the definition. But they want this. The first thing the Democrats put forward this year in the House, H.R. 1, the For the People's Act, would have legalized ballot or mail-in voting nationwide with same-day voter registration without ID and with legalized ballot harvesting. The United States Constitution doesn't say anything about how to run elections. It says the states will run elections, and the federal government is explicitly barred from interfering with the states doing that because that's the way our country runs. So this For the People Act got struck down, but Well, it passed the House, and then it got filibustered in the Senate. They don't have enough votes to move it forward. I think they can move it forward in the future. But it just shows you exactly who the people are. So big tech doesn't want to be broken up by and the federal government. They don't want Section 230 reform. They want to utilize Section 230 for whatever they want. So if you read Section 230, you'll see that it defines what they can says in subsection 2A, any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access or availability of materials that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. So it says they could censor stuff. They're immune from liability if they censor stuff for these reasons. And when it says otherwise objectionable, what that means is things that are akin to the other items in the list. That's the way the law works. You don't just get to make up what you want, because let's say they could do it whatever they want. Okay, so Democrat politician calls up big tech and says, hey, we got this Russiagate investigation. Kamala Harris sat on it, and she put out all this disinformation about Trump being a Russian agent for years so that she could run for president. And we need you to censor the Republicans because we're saying there's a disinformation campaign from the Russians, and we're using that in order to cover for us to censor because the Republicans are trying to break up big tech. So we're going to work with you. We're going to conspire with you in order to get Trump out of office, because Trump means that we're going to rein in the big tech platforms. We're going to reform Section 230. So we got to make sure the Democrats win in order to so that the Democrats won't break us up. As long as we keep censoring big tech, or as long as we keep censoring conservatives, as long as we keep censoring COVID misinformation, medical misinformation, then the Democrats are like, hey, why would we want to break these people up? These people are on our side. We are winning right now. Bruh. Like, it's checkmate. And so obviously that's not legal, not legal in any way, shape, or form. So when it says otherwise objectionable, it does not mean that they can censor stuff on the behalf of Democrat politicians. It does not mean that they can engage in election engineering. And so this guy, Bill Barr, moving it back to the subject at hand, Mr. Rhino Bill Barr, he did not back up our side. We had a legitimate grievance with the election, with incidences such as dang it. I guess I don't have the thing. So incidences such as when they put the pizza boxes up over the windows, as you can see in this picture, this guy putting up the gigantic pizza boxes. Sorry, gotta save it. Apparently it wasn't in there. So you could see they're covering up the windows because they don't want you to look inside. There was also that incident at State Farm Arena where a pipe burst in the toilet. Like they said it was, they had to clear everybody out because a pipe burst. And then that woman pulled out the suitcase. In Suitcase Gate. Here we can see a graph of the spike here from Suitcase Gate when the woman pulled out that suitcase full of these votes, and most of them were for Biden. And so they're saying, definitely a lot of that election fraud stuff was bunk. I believe there was disinformation in there that they were taking advantage of the claim that it was disinformation to run their policies through. But he should have backed us up because there's legitimate claims in there. Now, this stuff could have been bunk. Now, they might have just been messing with us and putting pizza boxes up on the windows. Good probability chance that nothing spooky happened, that they just did ballot harvesting and they didn't need to do any other fishy business because ballot harvesting was enough to rig the election like that. That's definitely a probability. But Bill Barr didn't do any sort of research into any of this. Bill Barr did not organize any sort of forensic audits into the voting machines. Like they didn't even do a forensic audit in Arizona until recently. And they found a bunch of evidence of tampering in the election audit. The city to this day refuses to turn over the routers, even though a judge court ordered them to turn the routers over to the election officials. They said that the routers contained private information of citizens and that they were not going to hand over the routers, even after a judge told them to. These kind of things, they need to go to a court. I'm not qualified. I'm agnostic about anything. I don't know whether or not any of this stuff happened, if the ballot harvesting actually was enough fraud to swing the election. I don't know. All I can tell you is if I'm an engineer, I'm a software and computer engineer. I make computers. I make software. I got my own networking protocol. I know how to encrypt things. I know how to do like proof of service, quality of service levels. It's pretty easy. I know how the Dominion voting systems are set up inside. And the way that they're set up inside are very sketchy. They have a computer where a Windows machine that can run a piece of software can have access to all of the information, and then they're deleting the ballot images, and we don't have any sort of way to verify that these machines tabulated them correctly. So, in my opinion, we have to have an open source voting machine, and we have to be able to have these ballot images anonymized and put on the internet, or semi-anonymized. Or no, I think it's still just anonymized. So that you can run the algorithms on the ballots yourself, and that a certain percentage of the ballots are always checked to ensure that they matched up with the anonymized ballot. So it's semi-anonymous. There's an anonymized ballot image. has a number on it that you could track down to a physical ballot that you can go in and you can look and you can ensure that that ballot was scanned correctly. This should have been what all of the Republicans were coalescing around. Is it doesn't matter whether or not it was rigged or not. We need to have a more robust, secure, open source election system that is inspectable by the common person with a normal computer. If we can do that, all these people will shut up, because really, this caused a lot of problems. You had the January 6th Capitol siege, where you had FBI agents with top security clearances organizing people to riot at the Capitol, albeit the head of the Oath Keepers was a retired FBI agent. He had 2 decades of top secret security clearance. Albeit, yeah, law enforcement officers like Donald Trump, but law enforcement officers also, too, infiltrated the far right a long time ago, and FBI has plants in most of these far right extremist groups. They send spies in to keep tabs on them. And in the case of the kidnapping plot against Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, FBI agents actually organized these 3% militia members to kidnap a sitting governor of a state in the United States, Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And it was a setup. It was like a narcotics officer who was selling drugs in order to convict someone of distribution of drugs. You know, they sell them enough dope that they can charge them. Occasionally, they'll bust end users too, but mainly they set up the dealers so that they can hit them with a distribution charge. So they did the same thing with these guys, and then they end up blaming these people for the stuff that they started. So there is very good reason to believe that January 6th was a setup. Trump could be a charlatan. He might be innocent. He might be the victim. He might just be not so bright. And then he's got taken advantage of. But the facts are that the New York Police Department became aware of the January 6th Capitol riot or Capitol siege plot. They informed the FBI. FBI then informed U.S. Capitol Police and the Congress, the U.S. House Intelligence Committee. From there, Donald Trump was supposed to be warned in this process. Donald Trump, had he been warned, there's a plot, there's going to be a siege, the FBI knows about it, the U.S. Capitol Police were informed about it, and they were offered U.S. National Reserve troops to serve as backup, but they turned them down. They said, no, we don't want to create a perception. We don't want to amp up the riots, cause riots through the increased police presence, causing a perception that it's a police state. Right? And so this guy who made this decision was a black guy, Black Lives Matter supporter. And the people who organized the Capitol siege were with the 3%, with the Oath Keepers, which is a group of law enforcement officers who's sworn to uphold the U.S. Constitution. They're allegedly an anti-government group. Right. And then President Trump, he got on the megaphone and he said, we're going to march to the Capitol. We're going to do it peacefully. Had Trump known they're planning on a siege, he should have been on the microphone saying, hey, somebody's planning a siege. We have to stop anybody who's doing this. They're not with us. What we need to know is whether or not Donald Trump knew about this ahead of time and he didn't do anything, whether or not that was incompetence, or whether or not he's part of some sort of cabal where he's just working with him and his business allies to just get a bunch of money. He doesn't care about the job. Was it incompetence? Was it corruption? Or was it just a breakdown of intelligence? But the realities are very stark and very clear that there was good reason to believe that there was corporations from this Times article, such as the AFL-CIO and the U.S. Chambers of Commerce, that worked together with Facebook, as is alleged in this Times article. I went through and read it finally. And when you get into the weeds of it, it definitely looks as if this AFL-CIO public sector employee union group that controls the Democrats is guilty of some crimes. Definitely appears as if they put out this article to frame the story, to get ahead of the story, because it was going to get released and there was nothing that they can actually do about it. But knowing this, knowing that this happened, I think Bill Barr needs to make a public retraction of his statement. He needs to come forward and say that Donald Trump might have been wrong about some of these claims, but these other claims are perfectly legitimate claims, because mail-in voting is election fraud. People have guns at their homes. If you make every house a polling place, you've stuck guns at polling places where if you vote the wrong way, you're getting kicked out. Then you've got social media controlled by Mark Zuckerberg trying to prevent the federal government from breaking up Facebook. So they have every reason to censor Trump supporters, Republicans, conservatives, in order to prop up this conspiracy theory that Donald Trump is like this Russian agent, that Russia's influencing the election by putting out these memes. And then while they do that, then they're ramming through the election fraud right in front of your eyes. Like you're sitting there looking at it and you're like it's so large that it's like it just looks normal. It's like you're like an ant looking up at a human, and you're walking on a human, and to you it just looks like a flat surface. That's really essentially what's going on here. Is this corruption goes from China all the way through Silicon Valley, up through Eric Swalwell's penis into Fang Fang's vajayjay, up into Hunter Biden's crack pipe, into his lungs, along with all of that Parmesan cheese, and then all the way up to the White House now, where you have Hunter Biden taking millions of dollars from the Chinese government to gain access to Joe Biden. Also, the Burisma Ukraine energy, the corrupt Ukraine energy firm. And now we have COVID was used as a bioweapon, and the only reason why we had these mail-in elections was because of a bioweapon released by a hostile foreign state that the winner of the election's son was getting millions of dollars from. But it all goes out the window. All of the valid arguments, anything that is valid, like the corruption in Silicon Valley, the monopoly, the censoring of the conservatives using Section 230, the rigging of the all the choke points of information to control the narrative, to stop the Russian disinformation. All of this stuff gets gone completely out the window whenever Sidney Powell comes up and says that Dominion voting machines is some plot from Hugo Chavez, where she puts in all these specific claims, probably getting them from the 8kun or 8chan people, and then all that stuff just goes out the window. But it makes us look bad because we have legitimate claims here. Like there's absolutely enough reason to have a thorough audit nationwide of the entire election system. But the moment you say any of that stuff, now you're labeled as a far-right extremist conspiracy theorist. Your channel is demonetized because you said something controversial, because none of these corporations want to be associated with any sort of controversial stuff. And then where are most of these corporations making a lot of their money from? China. So they're like, no, you can't say anything controversial here because the Chinese companies and the companies that are making money in China are now going to pull advertising dollars from us. And now you can see that there's a gigantic problem here. There's corporations that are hostile to the United States, that are run by Chinese quote-unquote Communist Party bosses. These people are able to effectively censor our speech through pulling ad revenue from specific channels through their direct phone line with YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, that they can directly call up and say, hey, look, you have to pull advertising from these channels, anything that matches this signature. Why? Because they're talking about conservative values. They're talking about stuff that is against Democrats. It's against China. You have to stop them because that's controversial. And the problem is that people aren't backing us up. I've seen every rhino here put a knife in my back in town. Everybody who should be backing me up, it's like they don't want to read the stuff. So you could send them this link to this Times article. Be like, yo, these people admitted that they rigged the election in this Times Magazine article, right? And then they'll be like, they'll never read it. And then you'll be like, message them a few times, and you have to explain things. I can't just explain it in like one or two sentences. So it's going to be a paragraph. And then they never respond. They just basically cut you off. They say you're at a far-right conspiracy theorist lunatic. This is why we call them rhinos, because when the rubber meets the road, they're not going the same direction. They're going the opposite direction because they care more about themselves. That's the biggest problem here, is they don't want to put in the time to actually learn about the facts and what happened. They type on Facebook through their smartphones and their tablets, and they don't have a keyboard. And this means so that they can't respond to your messages. And if you're in front of a keyboard on a computer and you can type, you're going to be putting up walls of text, and they're going to say, this guy's crazy. People have to support us. there's nothing that I can do. I can't sit up here on YouTube and tell people facts and expect these facts to actually like get inside of their head and like make a difference. It's not going to make a difference because if people don't support people like me, like sharing this video, liking this video, subscribing to this channel, watching videos as they come out, then there's no way that we can organize. Like other people don't know like hardly anything about what's been going on compared to me. Like I've been running this news channel for a couple of years now and near full time for a long time. And the amount of stuff that you got to read to be able to understand these facts is very large. Like you need a documentary. There's got to be like some people that makes a video and a book that you can run through and you could see the facts and verify them because there's so many different things. There's so many different news stories. There's so much corruption going on in the big cities. So many different powerful interests that have so much money that can create distractions left and right that it's very easy for us to sound like we're crazy and hateful. Like we like hate illegal immigrants and like we're on some insane conspiracy theory shit when actually like the other people aren't paying attention at all. And we actually are critical thinkers and we actually looked into the evidence and we based off of empirical facts and family values and capitalist values, like the things that made us strong. Like we utilized the scientific process in order to get a diversity of different sources so that we could converge on the answer. And then most of us independently came up with the same determination that the Democrats are being absolutely corrupt. But then there's no, it's cognitive dissonance. It's like you got three people having a fight, right? So let's say that two people are fighting and then there's another person and they need to pick a side. This person's probably not very intelligent and when everybody's arguing and they're emotional, there's no way that you can actually talk facts into this person. So the only thing that you can do is you can utilize peer pressure in a cognitive dissonance triangle. And what you'll find is that the facts go out the window, that it becomes about the tribe. It becomes more about this is the person that I like more because that person represents more my lifestyle and where I'm trying to go. And so you could sit there and you could try to talk sense into these people until you're blue in the face, but it's just going to be fruitless. They've already made up their mind. They don't care about facts. They don't want to be involved in your fight. And so they'll burn you in favor of the person who's not causing the drama. Because even though if you don't pay attention to politics, it gets out of control and then they have to come deal with it. That doesn't click with them, that's actually an issue. To them, they think, okay, I don't want to get whacked. I don't want to get canceled. Don't want to get fired from my job for saying something stupid. So I'm just trying to not get in trouble. So I can't be associated with your thing because it's controversial. This should scare you. This should keep you up at night because fundamentally what they've said is anyone who says anything controversial is now gone. And in order to participate in the election, you have to be here. So after we've canceled you, after we've taken away your mic, after we've made it so that you can't communicate, now there's an election, and if you want to be a part of it, you have to be in on the conversation, but you just got shut out. All right, let's move on to the next story. Here in this next article from Breitbart, 57% of Texan voters disapprove of Joe Biden's handling of border crisis after Kamala Harris visit. The poll released Monday suggests 57% of Texan voters disapprove of President Kamala Harris and Vice President Joe Magoo Biden's handling of the sanctuary nation crisis on the southern border. After President Kamala Harris traveled to the state on Friday to inspect the borders 800 miles away from the crisis region and to show the rest of the country who wears the pants in the White House. It's definitely not the White House streaker, Joe Magoo Biden. Nope. He likes to walk around the White House naked at night. Definitely not him wearing the pants. Definitely Miss Kamala Harris, the one whose family, one half is Indians and their Brahmin class, which is the equivalent of a white supremacist. And then her other half was Jamaican slave traders. But we had to elect her because she represents diversity, right? Remember, the white people were bad because they owned slaves. But Kamala Harris's family is a notorious history of slave ownership, but it's A-okay. You want to know why? She's not white and she's a woman. So that means it doesn't matter that her family were very bad people. It doesn't matter. What matters is that she's a Democrat and she says there's systemic racism, that the white people are bad, that they took the land from the American Indians and they owned slaves and they built up this white power structure built on taking the fruits of the proletariat. These people need to take a history lesson. See, if you learn about the history of slave ownership in the United States, you'll actually find out that the slaves, most of them, in the beginning, almost all of them were white slaves and some American Indian slaves. And then slowly over time, the transatlantic slave trade started to generate money. And at the end, there was mostly African slaves. But if you average out the amount of slaves, there was about half white slaves and half West African slaves. Most people aren't aware of this, but the white slaves were not actually sold like the West African slaves. The West African slaves brought more money. They were more able to tolerate the heat. So when they took the slaves to the New World, the white people, a lot of them were prisoners that were sent to the colonies to work for as slaves. And they would put the white people in the slave ships with the Africans, and then they would put the white people in the worst conditions because they weren't worth as much money. They wanted to keep the black slaves healthy so that they could fetch a better price for them. But the white slaves, they were not chattel slaves. They would be freed after a while, so they weren't worth as much money. They were like indentured servants. So they oftentimes were treated much worse than the black slaves. Most of them went to the Caribbean and to South America. So it wasn't actually America where they went to. Only 4% of them went to America. So what they're saying is that the white people are bad because they owned slaves. And even though slavery was invented in Africa and the white people bought the slaves from Africans, but we're not allowed to enforce our immigration laws because of systemic racism. So when you try to kick out illegal immigrants, this is called whiteness. Whiteness is the story that we tell ourselves and internalize and use to justify our oppressor role to when we victimize the oppressed people. So whiteness is a disease, and it manifests itself as in a symptom called white rage. I know, like, where are you getting this stuff? The white rage is when the white people get upset because their white fragility, their like white power is slipping, and they're trying to preserve their racist white power structure. So they utilize this narrative called whiteness in order to maintain their power structure through what are called white allies. Now, a white ally is a non-white person who agrees with this whiteness narrative, and they are betraying people of color by siding with the white people because they want money, because they're Uncle Toms. This is why they say critical race theory is racist, because it really is racist. It really is and really what they're trying to do, these people are sketchy. These people are so sketchy. You cannot trust these people any farther than you can throw them, and trust me, you cannot throw these people very far. Right? So when you look at the demographics of the Democratic Party, there's a striking pattern that comes out. We could see the demographics of who voted for the Democrats in 2016. Here's the average GPAs. We've already covered it a couple of times already today. I'm not going to go over it. You can see the black people got the worst grades, 2.69 in 2010. Latinos, 2.84. White people, 3.09, and Asians topping the charts at 3.26. Good job. So then we could see over here, we could see the demographics, and we could see the lower your GPA is, the higher probability chance that you will vote for Democrats. See, the 91% of black people vote for Democrats, 66% of Hispanic people, and then white people is 39% vote for Democrats, 54% vote for Republicans. So we could see among college graduates that if the college graduate was white, that this person was educated through the far left universities, that they had a higher percentage chance of voting for Democrats. Now, we could see if this person is not white and they had a higher education, you could see they have a higher percent chance of voting for Republicans. So what you can take from this, after you look at the demographics, of course, because this stuff is everything. This map is everything in U.S. politics. This is the control over the country. This is Roe v. Wade. This is universal health care. This is infrastructure. This is Second Amendment, First Amendment. Everything is this map. And you can see most Democrats live in big cities. You can see most Republicans live in rural areas, small and medium-sized cities. So when the blue bars get very large compared to the red areas, this means that the Democrats have absolute control. As long as They keep up these sanctuary nation laws, keep flooding the big cities with illegal immigrants and cartel narcotics, where they're distributing trillions of dollars worth of cartel narcotics in the big cities right now. As long as they're able to keep up on the immigration so that there's more immigrants coming into the big cities, then it'll make it so that the Democrats will always have more votes. This is where you are able to pull back the curtains and see exactly how corrupt these people are. So they're saying the white people are racist. They got systemic racism. They got this culture of whiteness that is stealing the fruit of the labor of the proletariat there in the big cities. And that it's not the Democrats at the top. It's the racist Republicans in those poor rural red states. It's the 54% of white people who voted for Republicans. Which group of people exhibits signs of whiteness here? Is it the Democrats? Is it the blue? Is it the Republicans? So when you say whiteness, what you mean is conservative white person and conservative non-white person. Right. So now you can see what they've done is you got a bunch of Democrats who are activists in law school. They're up on some feminist stuff where they're convinced that there's a patriarchy of men who are holding down the women. They put a glass ceiling over their head. They've been raping them. They've been beating them. They've been locking them up, making them have babies, preventing them from going to school. They won't let them work. They won't let them vote. They are the big, bad conservative wolf. And so really what it is they don't want you to touch this pie. They don't want you to touch this. They do not want Republicans to cut off the flow of the illegal immigrants and the legal immigrants into these large cities because it is the only way that they will be able to maintain control over the cities because the immigrants that they just brought in are very conservative. So it's like, you can't really dislike these Latinos because if you're a Republican, because they're like affecting the vote, because really they're way more conservative than these white people in the big cities. Like the white people are some godless heathens, right? The Latinos that you just brought in are a bunch of conservative Christians that like, they like make their hair all nice and perfect. And like they wear like really nice clothes and like they look really good looking. And so like compared to us, like we're looking like pretty scrubby, dude. Like our hair is definitely not like looking as good. And we're not as healthy. Like we're pretty fat, actually. So in the big cities, you know, in order to actually maintain control over this, they have to use these racial politics in order to divide people because they have to keep the Latinos on their side, right? You got to keep looking at the graph, right? Only 2/3 of the Latinos vote for Democrats. And then the other 1/3 of them is only voting for Democrats because they won't kick out their parents. So that's pretty much what's going on in a nutshell on the border.
I'm actually writing a book about this because it is actually that corrupt. You would think like I'm just like sitting up here making up stuff, right? Like I'm like insane or something. No, actually the corruption that's going on in these big cities is the insane thing. Like this Joe Magoo Biden guy. And then Kamala Harris, the president, the one who wears the pants there in the White House. Like she's from San Francisco. California is a sanctuary state. Why is California a sanctuary state? Because the Democrats love the cartels that humans smuggle in the narcotics and the new voters. See, if the cartels and just stopped flooding the streets with all these narcotics, then they wouldn't be able to justify putting up the walls in the ivory tower. See, because their narrative is that the conservatives are the big bad wolf because they're trying to put up a race wall on the southern border to keep out the Latinos because they're like racist against Latinos or something. But then they themselves are sitting up top the ivory tower in the gated communities, and they're only letting in the Latinos to mow their lawn. You see, because they're in a meritocracy. You can't take the meritocracy out of this situation because who runs these big corporations? Like most people think it's the Republicans that run these big corporations, but that's not actually true. It's actually, in fact, actually the Democrats who run most of these big corporations because their politics is set up such that they can attack all the racist, sexist people, whoever is their competitors, and then the non-whites, like the Asians and the African businesses, they can all attack the white people, saying that we're systemically racist because we're trying to enforce our border policies. And this makes it so that they'll buy people. It's like a marketing strategy. People, when you say, it's like there's this old saying about soap selling racists, where there's two different kinds of racists. There's like a social Darwinist, and then there's a soap selling racist. So soap selling racist is like a soap salesman. So like if you're trying to sell soap, you're not supposed to be like, well, my soap is average. It's the same thing as these other guys' soaps. So that, it costs the same amount of money, but my soap is like unethical. It's unethically sourced soap. It's white soap, and there's something wrong with white soap. They victimize the non-whites, and so my soap's unethical. So you might want to think about going and getting your soap from the Asians or the Latinos or the Africans. That person would not be selling very much soap. So a soap selling racist is someone who says, no, my soap is the best. Buy my soap. Everybody else's soap sucks. So what this does with this labeling of conservatives and white people as racist for enforcing our immigration policies is that it causes our brand to get destroyed. Ow. So when you say, we're going to fire you if you're racist or sexist, and then there's systemic racism, all these white people they have this disease called whiteness, and so we have to get rid of these people. It's pretty brand ruining. Definitely should be putting a stop to these people who are trying to ruin our brand.
Hey, if you like this content, don't forget to smash that like button down below. I keep telling myself at some point in time, I'm going to limit the live stream to like 1 hour. Typically what happens is I'll go off on a tangent and then, it'll be like 15 to 45 minutes for an article. So I will be putting the timestamps down below. If you just want to navigate on to the next video, you can just click the timestamps down in the descriptions below. In the future, that is. Because we gotta. Oh, dang. Oops. Well, redo that one again. Apologize about the mic being off. Still working on that. This next article from Newsweek, Ilhan Omar condemns Joe Biden ordering airstrikes on Iran-based militias. Omar has been criticized previously for speaking out against attacks against Iran and has condemned U.S. sanctions against the Islamic Republic. Do they just make this stuff up? Like, really? This woman actually is in our Congress? Wow. I mean, for real? That is actually kind of mind-boggling because I'm really just kind of confused as to how exactly you could be against sanctions on the Islamic State. Maybe if you'd never watched any of those videos of ISIS, like burning the people, the captives alive in that pit, or putting them in the ring with the lions, or there was the ones where they cut their heads off. There was a bunch of those. There was the ones where they buried the children alive in the sand. I'm just really confused as to how any person in their right mind can actually be against putting sanctions on ISIS, because that's just insane. The bombardment took place a day before Israel's new president was scheduled to visit U.S. Vice President Joe Biden and President Kamala Harris at the White House, where Joe Biden likes to streak around naked. That's why we say that Kamala wears the pants around there. The U.S. carried out 3 airstrikes on Iranian targets on the border. 2 landed in Syria, and the other landed in Iraq. This constant cycle of violence and retribution is a failed policy and will not make us any safer, Omar said in a Twitter post. Here's the tweet. And it also says Congress has authority over war powers and should be consulted over any escalation. So I can understand why she capitalized war powers here. Okay. It is understandable why you would capitalize that, but in a legal context, you don't capitalize stuff like that. So Congress has power over war powers, right? So when you're dealing with words, you can actually convey meaning through the capitalization of the words that you use. And so in this context, if you want a grammatical tip, you need to make it so that the other things are below Congress. So when you say war powers, what you're saying is that the war powers are equal with Congress because they're both capitalized in the same way. You don't actually do that. So you have three levels of capitalization. You have war power, all lowercase, war power, and then war power in all uppercase. And so the federal government is at the top. So in this sentence, what you would say is that Congress is in all caps, and then war powers would be with capital letters at the beginning. But in this context, what you would actually say is Congress with a capital C at the beginning, and then war powers in all lowercase letters. And I know it sounds like a little bit nitpicky, but powerful people work like that. They actually that's their language. If you want to know the secret code of power, that's one of them. So she responded this to an ABC News tweet. It says, new : Pres Biden ordered airstrikes this week on Iran-backed militias near Iraq-Syria border in response to unmanned aerial vehicle attacks, according to Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby. So let me get this straight. So they attacked us with drones, and then we attacked them with drones, but we're bad for doing this. We shouldn't have done that. You know, the problem here is that we stopped dominating the world. Once we stopped dominating, then now all of a sudden, all these little weak people like Ilhan Omar, they all start like getting power and then like saying all this stupid stuff nonstop. And then now we got to put up with their crap. It's like, you know, I would just rather focus on something that was actually important. Ilhan Omar is not. Let's move on to a story that actually matters. Here in this next article from Newsweek, it's an opinion, says qualified immunity has to go. It's not negotiable. If our laws are to mean anything, the ones that police officers are sworn to uphold and protect, the public needs to know that misconduct will be punished regardless of whether you're a citizen or a law enforcer. So how's it work with the military? So the military kills people. Do we put so does that mean that we hold the military to the same legal standards as United States citizens? Hey, I remembered. Sorry. My OBS scenes are all messed up. So this is just an opinion. I don't like how they like market this as news. I mean, they do say it's news or opinion, but it's in a news feed. It says Newsweek. If you read the article, it doesn't really actually say exactly that. It's actually got two people that are competing ideologies. So it's a little bit lopsided. I mean, there's always been letters to the editor. They need to get... The problem that I have with this is like Newsweek is trying to like play all the sides. So they're trying to like act like they're not biased when they are. So what do? They market to both sides because they're trying to sell news to everybody. And then they put out these opinion pieces where unintelligent people are not going to be able to tell the difference in between this and news. And they're saying we're just being like balanced, right? We're just telling you the perspective from both sides. But it's like this is just extremely harmful to our country. Qualified immunity is exceedingly important. It's like, imagine if a doctor went to prison for malpractice on a patient. Like, yeah, it can happen, but the problem here is that why would these cops want to work this job if they're going to go to jail for having to enforce the law on some disrespectful big city punk that hates authority, hates cops, is okay with killing people, okay with brutally hurting people? Why on earth would anybody want to enforce the law in the hood where all these super violent hood people are? Nobody would. That's the problem here. It's like you gotta look at the lesser of the two evils in terms of who would receive more harm if you got rid of qualified immunity. So let's say the most harm is not coming from the police. The most harm is coming from the criminals. Okay. And then you take away the police and then you get more harm from the criminals. Okay. So then you're trying to say that maybe 1 in 100 persons is going to get brutalized by the cops. But then we stop doing this and then 1 in 20 gets brutalized by thugs. That doesn't make any sense. You have to balance out interests here. Like you've got one person has their right to life, liberty, property without the due process of law. And then the community also too has that. But the community is much larger. This one person is relatively a fluke when they get harmed by the police. But the people getting murdered and robbed and beat up, they're actually real people. They actually live in your community and they experience real pain, actually. Now, I know the other person's experiencing real pain, but there's like 20 times more of the people who are not getting harmed by the police who are getting hurt by the cops. That's the problem. These people, it's this critical legal studies, critical race theory, where they say that these cops got this bad motivation. They're propping up whiteness because whiteness is the story that we internalize. We use to justify our oppression of the non-whites, our white power structure, our racist police state. It has nothing to do with anything that the Democrats did, right? Nothing. Democrats started the KKK because they used to own slaves. They've historically been white supremacists. So the people who have historically been causing these racial issues has been Democrats. But now if you ask them, you see, they'll tell you that it's actually the Republicans that are actually responsible for this. That it's the Republicans who started the war on drugs, right? Because the war on drugs was going like before they ever called it the war on drugs. It wasn't. Nixon just gave it the term war on drugs. He coined a term for something that was already happening. And so the war on drugs actually started by a Democrat. So Joe Magoo Biden was the person who authored the 1994 crime bill that created the prison industrial complex. Before 1994, they weren't locking up people left and right for drugs. And then after that, then it was, and the black people supported this because the crime in the hood was so bad that they were willing to vote for a segregationist Joe Biden, because he's actually been in the Senate since the Paleolithic era. He was actually old enough to actually be someone who voted for segregation. But it's not their fault. It's actually the racist, it's the systemic racism. And it's not in the Democrat-run cities. It's everywhere. And it's because of whiteness. It's because these white supremacist police, they're enforcing these racist drug laws that the black people voted for. Like, dude, these people, I mean, somebody has to take their mic. Really what it is like somebody's propping these people up and giving them a mic, because all this stuff is fruitcake. This is some straight up fruitcake stuff, man. Almost all of these people who are out race rioting would love to stick a boot on the neck of a Republican and curb stomp them. They would love to beat me down for being up here on YouTube spitting facts and truth bombs, because this is called whiteness. It's the narrative that white people have under critical race theory that justifies their dominant and oppressor role. Apparently, I'm in a dominant role. Thank you very much. I did not know that. In fact, from my perspective here at the bottom of the social hierarchy, here in far left Eugene, Oregon, where I'm one of the only conservatives willing to open up my mouth. From my perspective up here, it definitely doesn't look like I'm dominant in any way, shape, or form. In fact, actually, it is actually kind of comical, actually. They actually think that I'm actually dominant. So I'm going to roll with it, dude. I seriously, just don't tell them. Just let them continue to think that I'm the dominant male, dude. Sorry, I spilled coffee. Move to get the show on the road. I wasn't supposed to take so much time commenting on those articles. Hey, don't forget to smash that like button down below. More people we get in here, the more interesting we'll have it. At some point in time, we'll have people commenting. Right now, not so much, but hey, you know what? Gotta break past that algorithm. In this next article from Fox News, White House stands by BLM nominee despite eco-terrorism links, views on population control. The White House continues to stand by Tracy Stone Manning, President Biden's nominee to lead the Bureau of Land Management, despite controversies over her links to an eco-terrorism plot and her views on population control. The White House has faced pressure from senators to withdraw Stone Manning's nomination since Fox News first revealed that she had traded her testimony for legal immunity in a tree spiking case in 1990. Stone Manning was granted immunity in exchange for testifying that she had retyped and sent an anonymous letter to the U.S. Forest Service on behalf of John P. Blount, her former roommate and friend. The letter told the Forest Service that 500 pounds of spikes measuring 8 to 10 inches in length had just been jammed into the trees of an Idaho forest. Tree spiking is a dangerous eco-terrorist tactic that has severely injured people, such as mill workers whose jaws was split in two from an exploding saw. Most recent, a retired federal agent involved in the probe said Stone Manning was an early target in the eco-terrorism investigation, contradicting her claims to senators that she had never been a target of a federal investigation. Ooh, this is juicy. I almost glossed over this one because I'm like, yeah, right, just more BS from Biden, right? BS Biden. Yeah, wow. Wow, this woman's a legit eco-terrorist, like making up stuff about getting people killed and that could get people killed. The anonymous agent told the E&E source on Friday that Stone Manning, quote, absolutely refused to do anything, end quote, to help with the investigation at first, only complied with law enforcement after, quote, she was caught, end quote. Quote, I got a call from FBI in Boston, Massachusetts, asking me if I had tree spiking case here. I said, quote, yes, end quote. The agent said, quote, guess what? Question mark. I have a lady right here in my office who can furnish you with information you need. And quote, the retired agent called saying Stone Manning only cooperated after being given the information. The agent said Stone Manning was viewed as a target of the grand jury probe. Stone Manning, on her standard Senate committee questionnaire, that she had been not been subject to any investigation, but touched on her involvement in the tree spiking court case. The nominee's past statements also appear to contradict her answer in the questionnaire. Stone Manning was also one of 7 people subpoenaed for fingerprints, hair samples, palm prints, and handwriting samples as part of a grand jury investigation into the tree spiking. The Montana Kaiman report in 1989. 1990, Stone Manning complained to the spokesman review in a paper in Washington State about the way she was treated by the FBI and U.S. Forest Service agents who were investigating the tree spiking incident. Quote, it was degrading. What was the other? Population control. I'm sorry, I'm getting bored with this. Oh, here's the stuff about the population control. Stone Manning has also faced scrutiny for urging population control to protect the environment in her graduate thesis. but the Biden administration still supports the embattled nominee. See, that's the problem with that notion of global warming. So, like, global warming seems pretty scammy because they're saying the temperature increase that we're supposed to be worried about is like from the Little Ice Age. They show you the temperature increase from the Industrial Revolution, a little bit before then, but they don't show you what it was before that. And then you look back in the core samples to the dinosaur times, and the temperature was way hotter, and there was way more CO2 in the atmosphere, and there was way more biodiversity. So, okay, obviously this doesn't match up because CO2 is plant food. And so why is it why are we talking about mass die-off in the first place? It's because of the deforestation of the rainforest and the pollution of the ocean. So they're like making a big deal about the air, but then there's like all these other things that are causing mass die-off. And then why are they doing that? It's because they want you to sell you solar panels from China. Like, okay, so these people who are pushing this, like Al Gore, Elon Musk, they all like could make a whole bunch of money if they got everybody on this green tech. Okay, all right. And then you get these wingnuts like this woman, Tracy Stone Manning, who's like, we got to depopulate. And then they're all up in his eco-terror. I mean, this woman is a special one. I mean, for real. For real. I mean, this is like par for the course for Joe Biden, but I mean, an eco-terrorist? I mean that is he saying hold my beer? Hey, if you like this content, don't forget to smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the bell so you get notified whenever I go live. Here in this next article from Newsweek, race hate gunmen who killed 2 black people wrote that whites are, quote, apex predators, end quote. Nathan Allen, 28, killed 2 black service veterans over the weekend after stealing a tractor trailer and then crashing into a home in Winthrop, Massachusetts. Wow, this one sounds like a special kind of nutcase. Woo. So he crashed the truck into a home on Veterans Road in Winthrop, Massachusetts on Saturday afternoon. Police said Allen climbed out of the truck and was armed with 2 guns, which he used to kill David Green and Ramona Cooper. Allen was later killed by police when they tried to apprehend him, and the incident is being investigated as a hate crime, authorities say. Allen was later killed by police, and when they tried to apprehend him, and the incident is being investigated. Oh, sorry, I just read that. His victims were both service veterans. Green was a retired 36-year-old veteran of the Massachusetts State Police, and Cooper was a staff sergeant with the U.S. Air Force. Winthrop Police Chief Terrence Delhanty said the statement issued on Sunday. Cooper was shot 3 times in the back, and Green was shot 4 times in the head and 3 times in the torso. Suffolk County District Attorney Rachel Rollins said in a press release, Green died at the scene while Cooper was pronounced dead at the hospital, police later confirmed. Investigators have since found some very troubling white supremacist rhetoric written by Allen prior to the shooting. Yeah, that's a shame because they got this critical race theory garbage going around where they're saying white people are systemically racist. And then, people read an article like this and they don't know anything about statistics. They don't know, okay, well, it's a country the size of, with 330 million people, one of the biggest countries in the world. And so when you put this many people in one place, you're going to get a bunch of wingnuts. And so they will make it sound like white supremacy is the worst thing in the world. And this obviously makes them believe that. But they never want to look at the elephant in the room, that more than 50% of the murders in the U.S. are committed by black people. So murders like this are like once every several years, maybe. Yeah, there's some crazy racist gangs, both black, Latino, Asian, and white. They all got the same problem. I don't know what to say. It's pretty shameful. It's not all white people, man. I don't know what to say. I'm tired of getting stereotyped as racist. It's not true. Okay. Do I have anything else that's like, this one's, I want to cover this. What else do I got? Here in this next article from The Hill, majority of young adults in the U.S. hold negative views of capitalism, according to a poll. How many people did they ask? I hate these polls. I hate how they will call 1,000 people in a country full of 330 million people and then say that it's like a fact. Overall, 41% of respondents said they had a positive view of socialism. 54% said they had a negative view. 51% of young Americans said they had a positive view of socialism, down from 55%. How many did they survey was between June 11th to 15th amongst 2,309 U.S. adults. Twice as large as prior sample sizes. I still don't think that would be a representative size, because even at that size, like here in Oregon, it would be like they called up about 80 people, a little less than 80 people. And then they said that this is what Oregon thinks. If you got 80 people in Oregon together and you ask them anything, you would get a very wide diversity of opinions. It would be very difficult to actually gauge anybody's opinion based on that small of a sample size. It really is like a very, very small sample size. Well, I'm just going to bail out here. I'm just like a little bit tired. This has been a long live stream. We're going to do this one last article here from the Daily Mail. Fewer than 1,000 patients are dying from COVID now, compared to 1 in 90 during the second wave. Cambridge University scientists also found 1 in 55 over 75s are now dying from COVID after catching the disease, compared to 1 in 5 during the darkest days in January. That's really good news. This is the problem with the lockdowns, is the majority of people that died were old and overweight and probably were going to die the next some odd years. So if you take the number of deaths and you average it out over 2 years, it's not going to look the same. It's perfectly natural for some number of hundreds of thousands of people extra to die 1 year, and then the next year to be about the same amount of people fewer died. It's actually kind of expected. It's never actually been like this steady increase in deaths. It's typically like about an extra 16,000 deaths per year in the U.S. right now due to our increase in population. But next year we'll be able to see all of the damage that was done from the lockdown. So the problem with the lockdown death reports were that the old folks' homes don't report all their deaths in with the hospitals. So the death or the data they were collecting from the hospitals was in real time, and then the data collected from the hospice was not. So then all that data came in at the end of the year, and they were able to recalculate. And then it looked like there was an extra 130,000 people that died from the lockdowns over beyond what was predicted, that 16,000 extra deaths increasing per year. Sorry. Been up here for some number of hours. How many? I've gone for like all night before. Hey, I'm just practicing, trying to get good. At some point in time, this show will be like awesome. I need like some other people to help me out to like, because I can do way more of these articles if we have other people finding them, and we have like 3 people and 2 people can talk, and then another person can search for articles and then do tech. Just bouncing back and forth. I'm trying to find people, but I'm the big bad wolf here in Eugene, Oregon. Most of my friends are like libs from rave parties. So I am the boogeyman. I am the imaginary misogynistic pig, the one from MSNBC, the one that everybody hates, the one that they attach all of their negative labels to, the cool guy that you should probably get to know. That's generally the pattern right now. Everything's backwards. So, hey, thanks for tuning in to RSS Commentary on Monday, June 28th. Again, I'm your host, Cale McCullough, a.k.a. The Captain. And until next time, as I say every time, farewell, sayonara, aloha, peace be with you.